My name's Callie, I'm the Okayest engineer, and in this episode, we actually go backwards in progress.
Oh, that's such a huge kick in the nuts. Oh no.
I got the helicopter out of the extremely cramped space so that I can actually take a step back and finally get kind of a real good look at what I've been doing. And I'm pretty happy. I'm not stoked, but I'm pretty happy. And the main reason is, and I should have done this when I was over there, but I was able to turn off the lights and cast a shadow onto this thing and really see really the imperfections and the high and low spots that were in here. I wish I would have done that back in the dirty portion, because I probably would have added a couple more spots of filler. The reality is I think there's a couple high spots that I can eventually just sand down, so that's okay. And I need to get a nice thick coat of high build primer on here anyways, and I think that's also going to smoothen out a lot of those imperfections that I found, rather than try and put the body filler on, or the fairing compound. The other thing is the fairing compound doesn't really feather into the rest of it super nicely. I can see kind of some ripples that are kind of in there, and I know that high build primer will actually help solve that issue. So maybe this is justifying. Maybe it's not, but I'm over the body filler right now. I just want to get this thing into a single color. But I think that's what we're going to do next. Pretty actually stoked with how the side skirts, or these chins, or whatever we want to call these things, those turned out actually really well. I was super worried about getting the contour right, but I think it's pretty good. All this will become a lot more apparent once I actually get it all a single color and can use that big long banana block sander and really start to understand this whole thing. Before I could start laying down any high build primer, I had to get rid of this excess fiberglass cloth, and I had to get this whole thing masked off so that I don't get any high build primer anywhere else on this fuselage. You can already tell I have that blue tape everywhere else, and so after this is all done and I pull this plug off, there won't be any high build primer or anything left. I'll go all the way back down to the bare gel coat and finish all the painting from there. I wanted to let you guys know of a few upgrades that we made to the shop this week. The first of which is this hydraulic lift table. Thanks to a handful of you who suggested that I do something better after seeing the slightly questionable way that I was lifting the helicopter before, I went out to Harbor Freight and purchased this. The issue though is this push bar. The way this is currently, this push bar would interfere with the helicopter the way that I want to use it, and we can't have this connected to this table. The problem there though is that this lever, which is used to lower the table, is connected to this bar and ends up being a huge problem. So we need to engineer our way out of having the lever on this bar and have something more standalone, which is a perfect segue into the second upgrade that we have for the shop. I've had this flash forge for probably, 12 years at least. There's probably, a couple thousand parts that have come off of this thing. And frankly, it's just extremely old and even more tired, and getting this thing to run has been extremely annoying. And so I won't bore you with the whole story, but I now have an equally old but significantly less tired MakerBot Replicator Plus. These two machines are from about the same era, but this one happens to be brand new. I probably can't get parts for it anymore. I probably will just run this thing until it's dead, but what a perfect excuse to use this to create the part that I need to design for that hydraulic lift table. I quickly jumped into Onshape and designed the simplest handheld lever that would pull the throttle cable, which is connected to the valve on the hydraulic actuator, that would allow the table to fall. And now that I have this handheld lever, I could then completely remove that push bar, allowing me to use this hydraulic lift for my helicopter. Having access to CAD software to quickly make a design, and then a 3D printer to make it even faster, is invaluable. And finally, the last upgrade for the shop. Previously, I'd been using this 8-gallon, 2-horsepower air compressor, which is just short of useless. It could barely keep up for even the seat mold and things of that size, and I knew I was going to need something bigger, so we upgraded to a 27-gallon, 200 PSI air compressor that should hopefully foot the bill for this larger cowling that we're building. Before we start, I want to give a huge shout out to Total Boat. They provided me with all the material that I'm going to be using today on this project. They've also extended a 5% discount to anyone who uses my affiliate link, which is linked in the description below. Today we're going to use the Total Boat Total Protect 2-part epoxy primer. This is a high build primer. You can thin it out, but I'm choosing not to because I really want that build. And it's in a 3-to-1 mix ratio. For the gun, we're using an Amazon special spray gun. I think it was like 15 bucks. You can see it's already been heavily used on the seat mold. It looks like trash. We're using a 1.7 millimeter nozzle only because the 2 millimeter nozzle was basically destroyed by the gel coat, but that should be good enough given my skills, which is not very much. I'm also using these disposable paint cups. These are really cool. I'm probably gonna pre-set up 3 or 4 of these based on how much I think this thing's gonna take for a first coat. It's got about a 90 or so minute pot life, so I've got plenty of time to get this laid down. And I may even let it dry for about 2 hours and then come back and put another coat on again, just to get a nice, thick, high build for us. These disposable cups, they do have a filter built into the lid. Based on how thick this stuff is, I actually ripped these things out. I don't know if you should or shouldn't, but I noticed that it didn't feed very well if I left this in, so I go ahead and I rip all those out. I've already gone ahead and sprayed it all off, actually in the dirty portion with an compressed air just to get all the dust off. Then we've gone ahead and given it a nice clean wipe with some acetone. I've let that all evaporate off, and I think we're good to go. This stuff is super clumpy to start with, so make sure you use a paint stick to mix this stuff up. The first time I did this, I attempted at just shaking it, and that just wasn't sufficient. Everything gets stuck to the bottom and you don't get a nice, clean mix. Pretty straightforward from here on out. You use the 3-to-1 ratio to measure your material and hardener out. I'm realizing also now that I totally looked at the wrong line for that first one, and it was a little short, but turned out to be just fine. And this is how I have it set up and how I'm actually going to paint it. And this is honestly a lot better than my original plan. I was going to hang it from the joists, but that was going to leave it unstable and was going to swing. Now I just have it lifted up and it's tilted actually on the back portion. That's actually where the skids mount, so that's really stiff. And then I was able to tilt it back, so that gives me access up high. It'll also give me access down low. And all in all, I think it's a pretty ideal setup for what we have going on. Well, the high build primer is finally cured. It's been about 24 hours, and having it all one color has definitely brought to the surface a whole bunch of those imperfections, which is a good thing. That's what I was going for. I'm probably gonna have to go back and use a little bit more fairing compound in some low spots. But I mean, that's just part of the game. The other thing I mentioned before is I removed those filters, and you can see some globs kind of that made it through the gun onto the fuselage. Just to be clear, I'm not I'm not using this as intended. I don't need it to be perfect, and I know I'm going to be sanding this down anyways. So if I was actually going to prep this for paint, I probably would have done something a little different. But once again, this is just mud and sticks and dirt and foam and crap to make something look pretty. So this is going to be sufficient enough. Also, from here on out, we are limited to strictly foam blocks for sanding. That will hopefully prevent any hard lines from being sanded into this nice smooth contour, and will hopefully make all of this nice and smooth and blend together. As far as this hydraulic lift is concerned, it's pretty awesome. It solves almost everything because nothing can be perfect. Unfortunately, there are only 2 caster wheels and then 2 are solid, which makes maneuvering this thing around in the basement a little bit more difficult. Luckily, most of the weight is on the back where these casters are, and so for the most part, I can lift the front end and kind of scoot these wheels around. Not ideal, but the lesser of 2 evils for sure. I've got all the high build primer sanded down to where it's either smooth or it's exposed something underneath, and we'll go over some of that here in a second. But I definitely noticed there are a lot of spots where it was way too low, and I actually didn't even know that was there until I got this high build primer on. And this side must have gotten a lot less love than the other side, because this one has way more issues and low spots than the other side did. But that's okay. I think we're just going to come back with some fairing compound. This actually makes it really nice. These ribs are basically high spots, and my my little spreader for the fairing compound will bridge that gap, so I should be able to fill those in rather easily. I did spend a whole lot of extra time in this area over here. I noticed when I was casting a shadow that there was a high spot here, and there was actually a low spot kind of in this area. And so I used that big yellow banana sander and basically just ran it in this area to get this nice and smooth. And that's when it exposed this high spot, and it was able to take most of that away. It does still have a very slight low spot in here. I think I'm just going to put a little bit extra high build primer in this area and then do the same thing one more time just to see if I can get all this to balance out. It's actually really close and smooth, so it's not like it may not even show up at all, but I'm just going to take a little bit extra time and care and make sure I get this as close as I can. It's going to be a little more difficult to tell down here with the shadow, but I didn't give the underside of this thing very much love either. It's pretty rough, and most of that you can actually just tell is just the fiberglass underneath. I just ignored it basically. So I got to come down here, throw some more fairing compound here, sand that down, and then give this whole thing one more nice deep coat of high build primer. Well, disaster has struck. What I thought were low spots were not actually low spots. They're actually soft spots. And it was extremely telling as soon as I got the outer layer off what I had done to cause this. Oh. I know exactly what happened.
Oh, that's such a huge kick in the nuts. Oh no.
And it goes back to when I mentioned that this side was a little bit lean and I probably should have used a little bit more resin. Well, there were micro pores in the fiberglass. When I sanded it down and then used some acetone to clean it all, that acetone weeped into the fiberglass and ate away the foam that was underneath it. disaster. And so I initially thought, well, maybe I'll just cut the whole section out, fill it with some fairing compound and put it back. My main concern, though, is what's going to happen at this interface between the fiberglass and what will eventually be the fairing compound. That may crack because there's nothing holding it together, and that'll be a disaster. I also thought about putting down another layer of fiberglass over it, but God bless, that would be also another disaster. So I think what I'm going to do is, and I've marked basically all of the locations, what I think to be the top and the bottom of the voids, and I'm going to drill 2 holes, use my infant's Tylenol syringe that we have a whole bunch of. Don't worry, I'm not stealing from my infant. But I'm going to use this syringe, and I think I'm just going to use straight epoxy. We'll start at the bottom, we'll syringe it in, and wait for it to come out the top, and then we'll put some tape on the bottom just to seal it and see how that goes. And hopefully that will make the surface a lot stronger, because I'm now filled with something stiff behind it, and I don't have to worry about huge spots where I have filler and then a potential line where it's going to crack in the future. I was so close. I was so close. And this is just a setback. And I should have known better. This has happened in the seat plug. And I guess the only thing that I can say is just be really careful when you're using acetone on the surface, because the acetone, if it seeps through, it will eat away the foam. So we'll get there. All right, well, that's it. My biggest concern right now is gravity basically siphoning or just pulling all of the epoxy out. And it's kind of pushing the tape out, which, I mean, tape can't hold pressure, but it's pushing the tape out and a little bit is seeping out. I just hope that it holds enough of it in there that it'll be okay. And then I fully anticipate this being a disaster of trying to sand this paper or this tape off and then try and finish this again. But I don't know. That's my best shot. I didn't want to use micro balloons because I was worried that it wouldn't actually push all the way through there. Happy I didn't, because some of these were rather difficult to actually get to push through. So I think anything thicker would have been, I don't know, more of a challenge. So we'll see how this goes tomorrow, and then I'll fill in these larger holes with that fairing compound tomorrow, and hopefully I can get it to where it'll be secure enough and we won't get any cracking. But disappointing, but we'll see how it goes. Well, it's the next day, and I've removed all the tape and actually spent some time sanding all of these areas back down. The good news is I think this solution is going to work. It's actually made these soft spots pretty stiff, stiff enough for at least what we're trying to do. Unfortunately, I just wish I never would have made this mistake in the first place. So there's that. I also found overnight there's actually more locations that are issues over here. So that's what I have going on here. Also, hindsight's 2020. Because I was in just a bad headspace, I didn't think about the amount of resin that was going to run off onto my already sanded spots. And so I got resin basically everywhere. So this go around, I've masked up below those holes and hopefully can prevent resin from just spoiling this whole thing and just creating more work. So that's basically what we have going on. I'm going to get these ones cleaned up today, and then I'm also going to fill in the bigger holes with some fairing compound and get those things on their way to being pretty as well. So good news is we're on track again. It's going to be a couple days setback, but it is what it is. We can save this thing, and at least we're not starting over. In an attempt to give the interface between the fairing compound and this existing fiberglass a little bit more support, I'm digging out underneath the fiberglass to create a void so that I can shove in that fairing compound underneath it and hopefully get a better mechanical bond support between the two. I don't know if it's going to work. I'm hoping it's going to work, and I think it's better than not doing anything at all. I left it pretty rough and then was able to come back the next day after it had fully cured and then give it one more final kind of smoothing pass before I could then sand it all back down and be nice and flush with the rest of the fuselage. I got in a little bit too much of a rush and forgot to actually show you guys the results and the finished product of putting and finishing the fairing compound patches that were in the side of this mold. Good news is all of these repairs I think will work perfectly. What you're seeing now is actually this after the second coat of primer. I made sure not to repeat my mistakes and used water this time to clean the whole surface. And from what I can tell, I think everything is going to be just fine. I didn't want to leave you guys on a video where I was just stuck in a hole, so I am happy to report that things are good. We are back to where we were, and now we can go back forward with progress again. And for anyone who's counting, I've gone through about 3/4 of a gallon of fairing compound. All of that, or most of that, ended up on the floor as waste. I've also gone through an entire gallon of high build primer. We used a half a gallon on the first coat. That, again, I didn't take a picture of it, but most of it ended up on the floor. And then I did a super thick coat again now that I think I'll be able to sand and get down to a perfectly smooth surface. I'm probably going to rip this thing apart and repurpose the 5 stepper motors for something, and I'm curious what you guys think I should do with it. I've always wanted to make kind of a sky cam, and I could probably put one of those down here in the basement and use it for time lapses or something, but curious what you guys have in mind. What should I do with the extra parts that I have from this old printer? I also appreciate the feedback for the logo. It sounds like number 5 was the winner. That was also true over on Instagram, so pretty overwhelming there. As always, go build something cool, never stop learning, never give up, and we'll see you on the next one.